Good afternoon. I wanted to present our speakers. Amy Gravino is a college coach for students on the autism spectrum, autism consultant, public speaker, and the director of public and community relations for GRASP. She has her master's degree in applied behavior analysis and serves on the boards of the Daniel Jordan Fiddle Foundation and Autism Speaks. Lorin Neikirk is a self-advocate with Asperger's, known for her Aspie-friendly educational books and programs, public speaking, and advocacy. She sheds light on improving the quality of life for individuals on the spectrum, as well as neurological processes she calls autistic logic. So, welcome, ladies.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Okay. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome to Sexuality in the Spectrum. I know, scary topic, but we're going to make it less scary for you, hopefully, by the end of this presentation. So, I am Amy Gravino, as was said, and here we go. So, let's talk about sex. Now, I borrowed some of this stuff at the beginning from my very good friend Peter Gerhardt, who I often co-present with about this topic, because he knows his stuff pretty well. So, all the technical, boring stuff is from him, and then the other stuff is me. But sex and sexuality, as serious topics for discussion, are ones that a lot of us would rather avoid. And when it comes to sexuality and the autism spectrum, this might be even more true for a variety of reasons that we will get into. Not the least of which is, parents just don't want to even think about that being something that they have to deal with on top of all the other issues that arise. So it's a challenging thing. But we're going to keep calm and talk about sex, because it's important to be calm about this and to talk about it like we would any other topic, because it's part of the spectrum of human behavior. It's something that people on the spectrum should have the opportunity to be a part of and engage in if they so choose. So why is it important? Okay, why is this sexuality stuff so darn important? Well, a wise person, someone much wiser than me, once said, sex begins long before sex begins. What does that mean? It means that when we talk about sexuality, it doesn't just mean what happens in the bedroom under the sheets. Intimacy and being close to someone can happen without any kind of sexual contact whatsoever. And it's that stuff, the intimacy and the closeness with another human being, that is so challenging for people on the spectrum. So that stuff is important, and it is a conversation that starts long before you ever go into the bedroom. So that's why this stuff is so important to be discussed, because it's about so much more than just going for a roll in the hay. So, and because we have the same hormones, urges, and desires, and need to make the same choices as our neurotypical peers. So that's why this is such an important topic to address. And people don't often consider this. There's still a stereotype that exists that if you have autism, you don't have sex. And it's not true. And so a lot of people on the spectrum are left without the essential information that we need to make healthy and important choices about our sexuality. So this has to be talked about, and somebody's got to do the job, so it might as well be me. So let's talk a little bit just about puberty, because maybe some people might think, well, maybe people on the spectrum don't develop the same way as their neurotypical peers. Like, what about, puberty and all that stuff? Well, we may have challenges developmentally in terms of, the things that you all know that I don't even have to tell you, but our bodies are the same. We develop physically very much the same as our same age peers, although there are some differences, of course. But so puberty is a sequence of events by which a child becomes an adult. That's the simplest definition. And it's characterized by hormonal changes and all kinds of other changes. And puberty, begins after age 8. And of course, girls tend to start puberty earlier than boys. And what happens in puberty can vary based on where someone lives and environmental factors and all kinds of different things like that. So, but puberty is something that we all go through, whether we like it or not, and that includes people on the spectrum. So these changes come about, these physical and hormonal changes, and they bring about all the things that any person who isn't on the spectrum goes through, but we do too, and it's important that it be looked at. So there's very little research on puberty and ASD. And do you want to know how much research there is on autism and sexuality? Like peer-reviewed research? Zero. There's nothing. For my thesis in graduate school, I used the principles of ABA to teach adult men with Asperger's how to ask someone on a date. And I had to build that study kind of from the ground up because there was plenty of studies in the research body teaching social skills, but not teaching dating skills. There really wasn't. And so I said, well, that's not right. And everybody was doing early intervention. And you know, I didn't like kids when I was a kid. I don't really like them now. I don't hate them. But leave it to the people who are good at that. That's good. Let them do that. But I want to work with adolescents and adults because there's a dearth of resources out there, as you all know, and services. So there's just very little information out there about these topics. And it's a big gap in the research bank. So it really needs to be made up for and discussed. And I may not be a clinical expert, but I am a person on the spectrum, and I'm here with the expertise of someone who's lived their life dealing with all of this stuff. So that's what you're going to hear about today. And parents and professionals often ignore these things, which are very, very important. The emotional impact of adolescence, non-heterosexual curiosities and orientations and gender expression outside of the gender binary, which you see in the neurotypical population and people on the spectrum too. I'll get more into that in a bit. And sexual safety and empowerment for individuals on the spectrum. And sexuality in general is just something that people just don't want to go anywhere near. And if you go and try to address this stuff when your kid is 17, 18, you're like 4 years too late at least. You have to start way before then. And you can start in age-appropriate ways, but it has to begin well before anything becomes an issue. So that's why these things, need to be talked about. So what better way to understand this stuff than to hear from us? Because we've been through it. And that's why we're here today, is to help you understand this stuff. And so here's a little bit about me. I was diagnosed at age 10, very rare. This was 1994, just when Asperger's was added to the DSM. Bye-bye, Asperger's, you're gone now. And it was, very rare for a woman to be diagnosed. So I was fortunate in that regard. I have a master's degree now, obviously, and I'm involved with all these different organizations, and I speak at all these conferences and stuff. And that's me now. But in 1996, like any other 13-year-old, now you might be wondering why Davy Jones is there. And I'll tell you. Because I became a very big fan of the Monkees back when I was 12, 13 years old. And I had a big old crush on him. So and as if I wasn't teased enough about things in school, I had pictures of the Monkees in my locker, and that just didn't win me any popularity contests. So, but that's why he's there. But, so these, 13, I'm starting to notice boys. For some people on the spectrum, it's girls, or it may not, But, so this is where it all started. But the age that I had my first interest was not the age of my first experience, because nobody wanted to come near me with a 10-foot pole. So, typical kids get to explore these things by, like you kiss under the bleachers or whatever, and all these different things. I didn't have any sort of outlet. And I had these curiosities, and I had these desires, but I just had no way to, and you'll notice this with people on the spectrum. Like, as I said, my first interests were when I was around 13. I didn't have my first kiss till I was 17. So that's kind of a big gap there. And it was really very frustrating because I wanted a boyfriend more than anything in the world, and I could not get one. And so because of those problems, that's when I turned to the internet. And that can be a big old problem all on its own. This is 1998 we're talking about, but there were still chat rooms. There were still predators. Like the guy who said he was AJ from the Backstreet Boys, and I believed him because I didn't know any better, and I thought it was. And he was some guy in Michigan, God knows, he sent me a letter, a typed letter, not handwritten, and a ring, and I found out later my parents hired a private investigator to look into him. I didn't know that. But because I could not be myself in the real world, and I couldn't make connections with people, I turned to the internet for solace, for friendship, and for someone to recognize me as somebody who wanted to be seen as beautiful. I wanted someone to see that I was a girl who was dateable, maybe, possibly, if there was the remotest chance. And I had just no idea how vulnerable I really was. And I was, because there are people out there, just as there are people out there now, who will prey on people on the spectrum. But when you are that lonely and you're looking for that, it doesn't occur to you, especially when you're 14 years old. That's not, that kind of danger just isn't perceived. But I think 14-year-olds are a lot savvier now than when I was 14. But that's in the neurotypical population. Still, people on the spectrum are still vulnerable now, just as I was then. And so I just had a lot of disappointing experiences in real life with the opposite sex. There was a boy who moved in across the street when I was 15 or 16, and he was 13, and he had, this Caesar haircut that put Julius Caesar to shame, and he had freckles, and he was the cutest boy ever, and because I didn't know how to connect with him emotionally, which was what I wanted, I would compensate by getting close to him physically. So he'd be on his computer, he'd want to show me something. Oh, here, Amy, come look at this. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, what is it? So I'd be right on top of him because I wanted to be close to him, but I didn't understand how to make that connection. So he eventually stopped talking to me, and every time I would look over there after that, he would glare at me, and I would wave, and about 500 waves later, I finally got the message that he wanted nothing to do with me. And then my first French kiss, that was when I was 17, and it was with a 14-year-old, and I didn't know why his mom didn't like me and didn't want me calling the house. I would call, and she'd be like, don't ever call here again, and I didn't understand why. And found out a couple years ago that he came out as gay, which I'm not surprised, really. So I should have seen that coming. But and then my senior prom, I had a date. He was a junior, and the only way juniors go to the senior prom is if they go with the senior. And I had a crush on this boy the whole year, and I'd asked him, and he was friends with the seniors. I really wasn't. So the majority of the night, he was, dancing with other girls and stuff, and I was sitting at the table writing poetry on scraps of paper. So I had this idea that I would go to the prom and it would be my one perfect high school moment, because I still believed in the movies and things like that, and it just wasn't to be. So it was just kind of one disappointment after another, which was very frustrating, and which can show you why I went online where I was free from being judged. But finally, when I was 19, I had a boyfriend, and I had no idea what it meant to be a girlfriend. And I wasn't just myself. I was trying to play the role of a girlfriend. What does that mean? So I have to laugh at his jokes, even if they're not funny. I have to like his parents. I have to, smile at him. I was going through a checklist in my mind because this was so foreign to me and something I had no experience with, that I was trying so hard to be what I thought I was supposed to be. But there was a big discrepancy between what was expected of me as a girlfriend versus what I was able to do. There was just a lot that I didn't have a knowledge base for, I didn't have confidence for. And he, I think that he was on the spectrum actually, but every time I would mention it, he would change the subject and he didn't want to talk about it. So, but he, I deferred to him, and this is going to be a repeating pattern, which you'll see, because he was more experienced. I believe that I had no right to question anything, or that my voice didn't count. So it was there were a lot of perils and pitfalls to this. And he did dump me, and he actually assaulted me, which sounds worse than it was. He kicked me in the shin, and he smacked my forehead with his palm of his hand. He was 6'3", I'm 5'0", so kind of an uneven match there. And I had to get a protection from abuse order and all this stuff. So it was really I can't seem to have a relationship end without some kind of horrible dramatics of some kind. But that was the first time that happened, and that was pretty rough. But when I started dating him, it was the beginning of discovering not just what it is to be a girlfriend or be in a relationship, but it was the beginning of discovering myself. Because for all the years up till then, I didn't feel connected to my body. Because I had such low self-esteem and I hated myself, I didn't really have a cognizance of my own body as being attached to me. When I got my first period, I went through 4 days and I had no idea what was going on, and my mother wandered in the bathroom and she saw, and she said, "Oh, you're become a woman now." And I was like, "Huh?" So I just had no awareness of myself, and being seen as a sexual being changed that. It was the first time that I saw myself also as a sexual being, as someone capable of engaging in sexual activity. And I remember looking down one time and noticing that I had pubic hair, which I had never been aware of. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have pubic hair, and there's a lot of it. It's like the Black Forest." So that was, and of course, I decided to do maintenance after that, but he, who was hairier than a chia pet, I didn't even say a word to him, because I thought, well, boys are allowed to have all that hair. No, trim, please. For God's sake. If I want to pick my teeth, I'll get a toothpick. But, sorry. So this was such a big change for me to be viewed in this light, not just for him to see me as somebody sexually attractive, but for me to see myself that way, that was something I never thought would ever happen. So it was the beginning of all this. And part of that discovery also included masturbation, which I had never done. I didn't even know girls could do that. In high school when they teach you sex ed, when they talk about masturbation, if they do, they talk about it with boys. They never say a word about girls. And I didn't do it until the summer before my senior year of college for the first time. And that was, that changed everything too, because suddenly I was in charge of my own sexual enjoyment. It wasn't in the hands of a guy or someone else. I could take charge of that. And that was such a huge thing, and it was so different. And I didn't feel any shame about it, which is the thing. I think a lot of people on the spectrum, we only feel shame when someone else makes us feel like we should be feeling ashamed of something. Because me, I've never felt any shame about sex and sexuality. Obviously, I'm standing here giving this presentation. So, that was a big thing, that when I was exploring these things, it was just natural. And it's so important to keep shame away from these things, because too often we attach that value to these kinds of behaviors, and we shouldn't. That just screws people up and gives them more things to talk about in therapy. You don't need to do that. We're people on the spectrum, we have enough to deal with. We don't need more shame lumped on top of everything else. So it was a really great thing that I got to know my body in that way, getting to know my buttons and the things that I like, because up until then, I was just counting on him to tell me what I liked. I didn't know. I was like, wait, do I like that? I don't know. So it was such a big thing to get to know myself in that regard. And I just want to make a point about gender and sexual orientation, because too many people don't realize that any sexual orientation or gender identity that you will find in neurotypicals, you'll find on people on the spectrum. So you'll find people on the spectrum who are asexual, pansexual, bisexual, heterosexual, homosexual. You'll find people on the spectrum who are transgender, bigendered, cisgendered, and people who are just gender nonconforming in general, who don't appear as either male or female. They don't conform to either specific role. And the most important thing is that we are able to express ourselves in a safe and non-judgmental environment, and that's very hard to come by. I know it's a difficult thing for people to understand, but that's, and this picture here really gives you a good idea about what gender is and what it isn't, and make sure you take a look at that, because I think that covers it pretty well. But, so, when I was 22, I fell in love for the first time. And this represents the blinders that I had on, that many of us have on when we're in love. And I had moved to Seattle. I was 3,000 miles across the country. I'd met this guy online, of course, big mistake. And I'd gone over there my spring break of senior year. I fell for him even more then, and then I moved when I graduated. And I remember I had waited. I had opportunities to have sex in college, but I knew I wasn't ready. So I waited, and when I met him, I knew he was the one that I wanted to do that with. And he was younger than I, but again, I was deferring to him because he was more experienced. And we were sitting in his car once, I remember, and I was ready to tell him that I was in love with him. I wanted to make absolute sure that that was what I was feeling before I said it. So I had really waited to say it. And when I finally did, I said, I think I might be in love with you. And you know what his response was? I know. Who are you, Han Solo? I know. I mean, it was a little anticlimactic, and definitely not the answer I wanted to hear. I mean, I had said, I love you to my ex-boyfriend, but he didn't say it back either. So, but in preparation for everything, I got on the birth control pill before I moved out west. I made 100% sure that we had condoms. I waited the full month you're supposed to wait for the pill to kick in. I mean, I was super, super prepared. And maybe that's me. I never have suffered from the idea that nothing can happen to me because I'm young. I was like, I don't want to get pregnant. I don't want to get a disease. So I made sure, to really check all my boxes. But as ready as you think that you are not ready. Because theory is a lot different than practice. And so here I am. I'm getting ready to have sex. I have no idea what to expect or do. And something that I thought to myself was, I want to know that I'm doing a good job. If we're going to do this again, which I hope we are, I need to know that what I'm doing is satisfactory. And I thought, in hotels and restaurants, they have these cards you can fill out to give feedback. So there should be a sexual intercourse comment card. And so I made one. And when I present this with Peter, he always says that the world would be a better place if people did this. And I think he's right. And so I was very serious with this, and these are some of the questions on the bag. What did you enjoy most about this sex session? What did you think could have been better? Please rate the following: the outfit I had on, my facial expressions, my noise, my vocal volume. Is there anything I can do in the future? But the problem with all of these questions, the big problem, is that they're all centered around his pleasure and his enjoyment. There's nothing to do with my enjoyment. My enjoyment was secondary, if at all. So this is that recurring pattern I mentioned before, where I'm deferring to the person I think is more experienced, and where you find that a lot of people on the spectrum are very eager to please and really wanting to make the other person happy. And this was certainly the case here, where all of this was, what I cared about, and I wasn't even thinking of myself. And I mean, I was prepared. Like I said, I picked out the bottle of wine I wanted. I had a music on the CD that I wanted. I told him to wear a white button-down shirt because I'd always fantasized about unbuttoning a guy's shirt before we were going to. And he did. He wore the button-down shirt. Everything was very, very planned. And then, you get in there, and, I mean, all I'm seeing is a wall of torso because he was 6'5", and I'm in unbelievable pain, and all I can think is, who's on Jon Stewart tonight? I wonder. I'm just drifting away, waiting for it to be over. Because like I said, as ready as you think you are, you're not. And so it was certainly different than maybe what I imagined. But, he filled this out, actually, if you can believe it. He humored me for whatever reason. And the funny thing, by the way, you might have seen next year's conference is going to be in New Orleans. That's where he lives now. And it's like the universe is telling me something. I don't know. But I haven't seen him in 9 years, since I moved. But then the inevitable, the heartbreak. What I didn't know was that he'd had a girlfriend the whole time. When I had started talking to him, he had said that he was seeing someone, and then when I moved there, he said they had broken up, that they had fought, but they didn't break up. And so he was still dating this girl, and he was sleeping with half the women in Seattle. And when this girl found out, she started calling me and threatening me. She threatened to kill me if I didn't leave Seattle, and all these other colorful things. She vacillated between threatening me and wanting to know things and being friendly toward me, which was really a mind F in so many ways. Like, she would message me wanting to see transcripts of my conversations with him just to see our everyday banter. And then when I was like, no, I don't think that's a good idea, she was like, I thought we were friends. How could you? I'm like, on what planet? I'm like, it was very, and it went on for months. It went on for, on and off for a few months, and every time the phone rang, despite my better judgment, I would answer because I kept hoping that it was him calling to say he was picking me over her, because I was in love. I was stupid. And, but he was quite literally ripped out of my life. He left, I had gotten him this journal that was monogrammed with his name and a pen that was engraved, and he left it outside of my apartment building at 7 a.m. And I brought it in, and I didn't mention this before, but when I had sex with him that first time, I was actually wearing a cheerleader uniform because I knew he liked cheerleaders. And partway through, he had felt he wasn't able to sustain his arousal, so I said, I have a surprise for you. And I put the uniform on. And it was the University of Washington Huskies uniform, girl size 16, I think, or 14. And so I took that journal and the pen and the uniform, which I couldn't bear to look at after all this, put them in a brown bag, went to the side of my apartment building, and set them on fire, which was a cleansing fire, and it was this great moment. My best friend had flown all the way from New York to come see me, and it was great right up until the fire department came because the smoke set off the alarm. And they came up along with the cops and knocked on the door, and I thought we were going to go to jail, but we didn't. So that was a cathartic moment right until then. But I was forced, excuse me, to... Oh, my goodness. I'm sorry. Excuse me. So there are two kinds of moving on. There's the moving on where you make a conscious choice to move on, and it's really a sense of closure. And then there's the moving on that you're forced to do because someone is ripped out of your life and you don't have any closure. You may never get any closure, but you have to. And so this was the moving on that I had to do. I had no option. I never saw him. I remember sitting in the airport. I was about to fly to New York because I couldn't stand to be in my own apartment because of all the memories. And I called one more time, and he said, we're going to get married. Get the F out of our lives. And it was just another kind of bullet in my chest. And so I really had to I had no choice but to try to move on. And it was hard. But the thing was that a few months later, he messaged me. And I remember he said, "Sorry for ruining your life." And I was so angry at that. I said, "How dare you give yourself that much credit? You haven't ruined my life. I'm still here. And I have this strength that I didn't know I had. I didn't realize it until this happened." And on top of everything else, as I said, I met him online. I met him on a message board for fans of the movie director Kevin Smith. And he had written this disgusting email to me, I guess at his his girlfriend's behest, saying, "Your first time was the grossest thing I ever did. You were just a retarded whore that I effed, blah, blah." And his girlfriend went into his account on the message board and posted the email for everyone to read. And it turned into this 11-page thread. So this very private thing became very public, and with everybody commenting on it. And so it was hard to deal with that too, but I got through that. And mostly all the comments on it were people being like, "Oh, you freaking a-hole, what's wrong with you? What kind of loser are you?" So it was all against him, luckily. But I had to summon up some strength in me that I didn't know was there. And the hardest part isn't losing trust in guys. It's losing trust in myself. It's all these years later now, and I'm still gun shy. I haven't really dated since then, and it really hurts to have that happen, and it makes you question yourself. And I'm writing a book now, and he's going to begin it, so I guess I get my revenge. And there's promo cards for the book in the back of the room, by the way, on the table. So where do we go from here? What do we do after that? Here's what you can do for helping your child or your client or yourself with dealing with these issues. Arm yourself with information. And because you're going to get questions, and you want to be able to answer those questions. You want to answer them honestly. You have to get past what I call the blushing cheek phase. You cannot be embarrassed to talk about these things because they are so important. And and your student, your child is going to ask you these things. And even if you don't know the answer, you can do research and find out and be able to give the best answer that you can. And be a safe space for your child, for your client. We all need a safe space where we can be ourselves, where we can ask those questions. And they're going to be looking for someone that they can talk to. If it's not you, they might end up talking to their peers. And God knows what information we get from our peers. I know I learned, I didn't have the birds and the bees talk with my parents. We had so much else going on. It just never was addressed. So I found out things that I found out from my peers. And I cannot say that was a particularly good thing. I mean, in 10th grade for English class, I wrote a story for an assignment, and I wrote it was a threesome between a friend of mine online and one of the members of NSYNC and one of the members of Backstreet Boys. And my classmates wanted me to read it in the hallway. They were like, read it. And I thought, oh, they like me. They're wanting me to read it. And I was just a sideshow freak act to them, and I got suspended for that. So be the person that your client or your child can be safe around and feel that they can talk to you. So both of us, something that we're passionate about, given the areas that we're both coming from, is empowerment, is preventing people on the spectrum from being victims, not just by worrying about safety, but also creating empowerment. And that means helping people on the spectrum discover their sexuality in a healthy and safe fashion. So you don't just prevent someone from being a victim by putting like a bubble around them and hiding them from the world. That's not what is going to work. You protect them by teaching them that they have the right to make these decisions for themselves. Because too often when we're growing up on the spectrum, we have adults making all these decisions for us, at IEP meetings, with services that we need in school, with every single aspect. And it becomes very hard for us to have kind of ownership of our own lives, our own decisions, our own bodies. So teaching not just safety, not just how to be safe, but also about pleasure and about what do you enjoy, what do you not enjoy, or if you don't like something, here's how you could tell someone, no, I'm not digging that. Because I never had that voice for the longest time when I first started being sexually active. I never thought it was my place to say that I didn't like something that someone was doing to me, because I thought, well, they have more experience. They're the one who's normal. I'm not. I don't understand these things, and I didn't trust myself. And that's a dangerous thing, to not trust yourself. And so it's and as people on the spectrum, we're taught to trust others almost implicitly. We're taught to rely on people who are in authority, teachers and, other adult figures. And so when it comes to this stuff, the person we have to really rely on is ourselves. Because I'm 32. I'm not going to be thinking about having sex with someone and call up my mom and be like, Mom, I don't know, should I have sex with this guy? I have to listen to my instincts because they're there. They're in all of us. And it's important that being on the spectrum, we learn to listen to those instincts and acknowledge that we have them. And so I know what I would love to do is create programs to teach these skills. As I said with my thesis, I taught adult men with Asperger's had asked someone on a date, and I would love to continue something like that at my offices in New Jersey, which would be a really great thing, because we need programs like that. They just don't exist at the moment. So I think that would, and being someone on the spectrum, I think I would be a great person to help with that. And so that's kind of my vantage of what I feel about empowerment. And Lorin?
I agree completely, and as far as like sexual assault and abuse goes, I think there's another additional issue to it, and that's kind of the criminal justice system. And I won't go into too much detail, but I will say that I really feel like there needs to be reform in the criminal justice system for victims who are autistic. I don't feel like that exists. I know that I initially did not feel like pressing charges against this guy. But it was the third time I was sexually assaulted, so I thought, what, I really need to step up this time. But I also was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and I felt like maybe I was too fragile. But I went ahead and did it for the next people that came along. And I encountered a lot of things throughout that process. I felt very empowered by doing that, but at the same time, within that, there were a lot of things that I found that were unique to people with autism, that it's bad enough for any victim. It's horrible for any victim to go through all of these things, but when you have autism, it can affect you in a completely different way, and we have unique needs. But so that empowerment is really important on the front end and the back end. So when someone does, from a victim standpoint, and it's not always a victimization, but when it is a victim standpoint, you can feel empowered, as an adult with autism or a parent of someone with autism, and go in and approach it from a different perspective that way.
Absolutely. It's especially hard for us as women. That's why we're offering you something that you might not hear in a different presentation, because as women on the spectrum, it is doubly hard for us with the challenges that we face, just as being women in this society, not let alone being on the spectrum. So it's, it's a whole other host of things. Women are taught, don't complain, be gentle, be quiet, be accommodating. And so it's very hard, for us to be more active and more engaged in these things, because we're taught that it's not okay to raise your voice. Be a lady, act like a lady. Well, I am acting like a lady because I'm screaming at the top of my lungs that I don't like you, you skeezy slip backline bag. And it's just important to have that voice, I really think, because we are so vulnerable. And I wouldn't have so many horror stories if that weren't the case. I wish I had fewer horror stories, but and they're not all horror stories. I mean, there are plenty of good examples, but for all too many of us, these things end up happening, and it's unfortunate. And but we're glad we could be here today to talk to you about it. And your handouts have our contact information.